Sometimes you don't really know how you're going to react until you're right there in the situation. I've read so many stories where people claim to have all the answers, but they always seem to fall on opposite sides of the issue. I grew up in a broken home. My parents fought all the time, and then one day, my dad just walked out on us. I was only 9 years old at the time and didn't fully understand what was happening. I had an older brother and sister, but they were already out of the house by then. My brother was 21 and my sister was 19, both away at college. Now they're both married and live in different states. I only see them during holidays or if they decide to visit on vacation. They aren't particularly close to Mom since she remarried. From what I understand, I was what they call a love child. My parents had me when they were trying to save their marriage. Things went well for a little while, but the fighting soon returned. I think the final blow came when Dad found out that Mom had been unfaithful. She claimed she only did it because Dad had cheated on her years before. This back and forth went on for a long time until, during one heated argument, Mom blurted out that I might not even be Dad's biological son. It was said in the heat of the moment, but Dad still decided to get a DNA test. Both of them were stunned when it turned out that I wasn't his son. The next morning, Dad started the divorce process. He was the only father I had ever known. He worked a lot and we were never particularly close, but after the divorce, it felt like I had no one left. We talked occasionally after that, but it was never the same. When I asked Mom about my real father, she told me she didn't know for sure. She always thought it was Dad. Life got harder after that. As I grew up, I learned that my mom had always been a bit of a social butterfly. She married young, had my brother and sister before she turned 21, and then started going out with her friends from work. Dad was a truck driver and often away, so both of them had cheated on each other over the years. Mom didn't remarry until I turned 18, but she did bring different men around after the divorce. They never stayed overnight when I was home, but it was clear they were part of her life. I kept my distance and never talked about it with anyone. I felt like I had to grow up fast and take care of myself. Fast forward to when I was 22. That's when I met Sophie. She worked as a secretary at the lumberyard where I had a job. We started dating and quickly became close. We got married within a year. Sophie was always a bit flirty with other people, but I chalked it up to her outgoing personality. She made friends easily, but I didn't think much of it at first. At the time, I didn't realize that there was more to her flirtatious nature. Our life together seemed pretty typical. We went to the movies, visited friends and family, and ate out a lot. Occasionally, Sophie would cook at home, but it was usually something simple like macaroni and cheese or a heat-and-serve meal. I didn't mind. We both worked and had busy schedules. Still, I sometimes wondered if Sophie was interested in other men, maybe because of the experiences I had growing up. I didn't want to think that way, but it was hard not to. I never told her about my mother's lifestyle, though. There were things about my past I kept to myself, especially the fact that I had caught my mom in some compromising situations. When we got married, it was partly because Sophie became pregnant. I felt like it was the right thing to do, even though her family wasn't thrilled about it. They blamed me for the pregnancy and acted like Sophie could do no wrong. It was clear I was going to have a tough time fitting in with them. The only person who seemed to be on my side was her younger sister, Emily. She was quieter and more reserved than Sophie, and I found myself drawn to her because she was the only one who would talk to me. Unfortunately, Sophie lost the baby when she was 5 months pregnant. That was 2 years ago. We've been married almost 3 years now, and I've asked her several times if she's ever been with anyone else. She always denies it, saying she doesn't need anyone but me. I guess I was naive and didn't know much about life at the time. After high school, my mom's new husband told me it was time to move out on my own. I found a cheap apartment and started working at the lumberyard. Life was pretty decent. I dated a few girls, but nothing serious. Sophie had gone to a junior college in our town and started working at the same lumberyard after she graduated. She grew up in Steubenville, Ohio, about 40 miles away, and sometimes she'd go home for the weekends to see her family. When I met them, it was clear they didn't care for me. I later found out that Sophie used to date a guy named Dylan, and her parents really liked him. Apparently, he was quite the football star during high school. Sophie broke things off with him when she went away to college. Dylan stayed behind, taking a job at the steel mill where his dad worked. I heard they made good money, especially since Dylan's dad was in management, and there was talk of Dylan getting fast-tracked for a promotion. Emily eventually told me that Dylan wasn't too happy when things ended between them and quickly married one of Sophie's friends, Nina. Now they have 2 kids, but Nina and Sophie don't get along anymore. That's why Sophie stayed in our town after graduation, living with an aunt until we got married. I never really got to know her aunt well. We had a simple courthouse wedding, and her parents didn't even bother to attend. The only ones who showed up were her sister Emily and her aunt. Since losing the baby, Sophie and her parents have patched things up, but I rarely visit them. I always enjoyed it when Emily came to visit us, though. I probably shouldn't feel this way, but I do. Over time, Sophie made a lot of friends in our town, including people from work and our neighbors. I knew she would go out with her friends now and then, but as far as I was aware, they were all married, and she never gave me any real reason to doubt her faithfulness. Sophie once told me that when her friends went to a lounge, she sometimes danced with other men, but that was the extent of it. A few times, she came home in an especially good mood, and the affection between us was stronger, particularly when she'd had a little too much to drink. I believed she was being faithful, and I trusted her. That belief changed during her cousin's wedding, which was about 40 miles away in Steubenville, where she grew up and graduated high school. It felt like more of a high school reunion than a wedding, with all the people she introduced me to. We both had a few drinks, especially since we were staying at the motel where the reception was held. I told her I didn't want to stay at her parents' house, as they barely spoke to me at the wedding. Things started going downhill when some of her old friends wanted to dance with her. It didn't bother me too much at first since her cousins and friends were also asking me to dance, and I made sure to be respectful. But Sophie, on the other hand, started flirting in a way that made me uncomfortable. She always had a playful side, especially when she drank, but this time, she took it too far. Her cousins told me it was harmless, that she had always been like that. I enjoyed dancing with Emily the most. She was easy to be around, and we shared a good connection, but I never let it get inappropriate. However, I did tell her that I didn't like how Sophie was behaving. Emily didn't say much in response, but I could tell she didn't entirely approve of Sophie's actions either. Later, I confronted Sophie during a slow dance, telling her I wasn't happy with the way she was acting. She just laughed it off, called me a party pooper, and said she was going to dance with whoever she wanted, however she wanted. After that, I stopped dancing and spent more time just watching and drinking, growing more irritated as I saw her getting far too close to a few guys. She even looked at me and laughed as she danced suggestively with them, rubbing up against them in ways that made my blood boil. There were 3 guys in particular who she was behaving the most inappropriately with. 2 were old friends from high school, and the 3rd was a friend of theirs. I had never seen her act this wild before. I walked over to her and told her to stop, or we were leaving. She looked me straight in the eye and told me if I wanted to leave, I should go ahead, but she wasn't going anywhere. I felt powerless. So I stood by the wall, out of the way, and kept watching, my frustration growing with each passing minute. It was late, and people were starting to head out. I thought things might finally calm down. I stepped away to the restroom, hoping to cool off for a bit. But when I returned, Sophie was gone. I looked everywhere for her, and even asked a couple of her cousins if they had seen her. That's when I saw 2 of the guys she had been dancing with. One of them mentioned that Dylan had taken her up to her room because she was drunk and needed help. They laughed about it, but I didn't find it amusing at all. I rushed up to our room, but she wasn't there. My worry grew, and I figured she might be in Dylan's room instead. I headed down to the front desk and asked what room her friends were staying in. I found out they were on the 1st floor, facing the pool, with 2 entrances. When I got down the hallway, I saw the same 2 guys getting ready to enter the room. They laughed at me again before disappearing inside. I followed, and that's when I heard Sophie's voice from inside the room. I knocked loudly on the door, and one of the guys opened it. I could see Sophie through the door, but it wasn't a scene I ever expected to witness. She was in a compromising position, and Dylan was there with her. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. When I demanded to know what was happening, one of the guys coldly told me that she had come willingly and that I could either stay and watch or leave. They made it clear that I was outnumbered, and they weren't about to let me cause any trouble. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do, feeling like I had no control over the situation. I left the room, feeling utterly defeated, my trust in Sophie completely shattered. I stayed seated in the corner, out of the way, as Sophie continued to engage with those men. She didn't seem to care, and honestly, I couldn't even understand why I didn't try harder to stop it. Maybe it was the fear, or perhaps it was my own past of being a passive observer that made me freeze. Sophie wasn't asking for help. She was fully participating. When Leo realized I wasn't going to fight back, he joined the others. I just sat there, feeling utterly powerless. Once they were done, Leo made a crude comment about Sophie, and I couldn't help but feel sick. Sophie finally noticed me sitting there and, looking shocked, asked, "Adam, what are you doing here?" I just stared at her, replying, "Watching my lying wife." I wasn't interested in hearing any excuses. She tried to apologize, claiming she'd had too much to drink and made a mistake. She asked the men to let her go so she could talk to me, but it was far too late for that. I didn't feel anything but disgust. I stood up and, without another word, left the room. My marriage to Sophie was over. What hurt most was the realization that I had been played for a fool. The betrayal stung, but more than that, the humiliation of it all burned deep inside me. It wasn't just that she cheated, it was that I had been made to watch it happen. As I walked away, I knew one thing. I couldn't let it go. These men had disrespected me, and I felt an overwhelming need for justice. I didn't know how or when, but I would make sure they wouldn't get away with it. I went up to my room, packed my things, and left. I figured Sophie could find her way back on her own. She had enough family around who could help her out. The next morning, around 10 a.m., the phone rang. It was Sophie. "Adam, how could you leave me there like that? How am I supposed to get home?" she asked, her voice full of frustration. I didn't hold back. "Ask one of your new friends. I'm sure they'd be more than willing to help," I said coldly. She tried to apologize again, saying it was all a mistake and that she had too much to drink, claiming that the men took advantage of her. But I wasn't buying it. I told her if she truly felt taken advantage of, she should file charges. If she wasn't willing to do that, then I knew she was lying about her involvement. She didn't deny it, but claimed she couldn't file charges because of the shame it would bring. I'd already made up my mind. I told her I'd be filing for divorce the next day and that she could have the apartment. I would be moving out and taking my things. I hung up the phone without waiting for her response. That evening, her sister Emily brought her home. By then, I had moved most of my belongings into storage and rented a small room by the week. I didn't need much. The next day, I went into work, quit my job, and made arrangements for my final checks and savings to be sent to me. I took half of the money from our joint account and paid off the balance on the credit card I shared with Sophie. I left the checkbook at the bank for her to pick up. Over the next few days, I started formulating a plan. I had managed to get around $2,000 from our savings, and with my final paycheck and the money from my job savings, I was expecting another $15,000 soon. I contacted a lawyer and filed for divorce, making it clear I wanted to proceed on the grounds of adultery. My lawyer advised me that if I were to pursue adultery as the reason, I would need concrete proof. Alternatively, I could opt for a dissolution, but I was set on letting the world know exactly what Sophie had done. The lawyer went ahead and sent Sophie the papers. He mentioned to her that I didn't want to speak to her and if she had any questions to contact him. I did buy a cell phone and gave my mom the number as well as the lawyer. I knew that there was a lumberyard in West Virginia just across the Ohio border. I had met the owner a few times when he came to a few lumber company meetings. He told me if I ever wanted a job, to look him up. I never thought I would be taking him up on it. I had a meeting with him and said I needed a job and explained that I was getting a divorce and that my wife worked for my old company. He promised not to tell my ex-employer that I was working for him and I could start the following Monday. I found myself a trailer for sale pretty cheap. It was set up in a trailer park. I picked up my stuff out of storage and moved in. Luckily, it had a lot of furniture in it, so I didn't have to go buy a lot of things. I stopped by a Bob Evans restaurant outside of Steubenville and couldn't believe my waitress was Emily, my soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law. She looked mad when she saw me. "Why did you leave Sophie?" She said you were mad because she danced with her old boyfriends and left her at the wedding. Then when she went to your room, you had left her stranded with no way to get home. I took her home the next morning, and you had moved out. How could you do such a thing? I never thought you were like that, she said. Most of what you said isn't true. I don't have time to explain the whole story. If you want to know the truth, give me a call, and we can meet, and I'll tell you the truth. Your sister is a lying, cheating slut. I know Emily was surprised when I called her sister a cheating slut. I never talked that way around Emily. I gave her my phone number and asked one favor of her, and that was to not give that phone number to Sophie. For some reason, I felt I could trust Emily. I ate breakfast and headed over to my new job. The only people that knew where I was working was Emily and my lawyer. It was funny that I was only 15 miles from Linda Martinez's hometown of Steubenville. I was surprised that I did get a call from Emily the following day. She worked mornings at the restaurant and went to college in the afternoon. She was taking courses in nursing and was just about finished. She had about a half year to go. She agreed to meet me for dinner at a restaurant in West Virginia after she got out of classes. She told me she wanted the truth and didn't feel she was getting it from Linda Martinez. Needless to say, Linda Martinez had everyone else convinced it was my jealousy that broke up our marriage. My job at the lumberyard was hard work but kept me physically fit. I got all the exercise I needed. Some days I went out and had a few beers with some of my fellow workers. I would usually get something to eat and then to bed to get some rest. I kept in touch with my lawyer, and he told me he needed the names and addresses of the men who had sex with Sophie. All I knew was their first names, Owen, Leo, and Dylan. I hoped that Emily might help me out. When we met for dinner, she wasn't in the best mood. She heard from Sophie that I was trying to divorce her on the grounds of adultery, and Linda Martinez said they were unfounded. We ordered dinner, and I told Emily that I would be totally honest with her. I had no reason to lie. As we were eating, I told her about the way that Linda Martinez acted at the wedding. She did say she thought that Linda Martinez was overdoing the flirting, and Linda Martinez admitted to it. Then I told her the rest of the wedding. She did say she thought that Sophie was overdoing the flirting, and Sophie admitted to it. Then I told her the rest of the story. I mentioned that I went to the restroom, and when I came out, Sophie was gone, and so was her friend Dylan. I let her know that I talked to Leo and Owen, and they said that Dylan took Sophie up to her room, but when I got there, she wasn't there. I went into detail about finding her in Dylan's room with his friends, how she was having sex with them, and didn't even know I was there. How could you just sit there and watch them having sex with Sophie? I can't believe you just sat there and did nothing. I guess I just froze when I first saw her. Then she was begging them to continue. Leo had a knife, and he did tell me it was 3 against 1. I would have probably fought them anyway if Sophie was being raped, but the sex with these 3 assholes was consensual. When Sophie turned around and saw me, she asked them to stop. She told me she made a mistake. I called her slut wife and that I would be getting a divorce. I went back to her room, got my things, and went home. I was gone when you dropped her off at home the next day. I swear to God it's the absolute truth. I would never lie to you. I care for you too much. I even mentioned to Sophie that if she filed rape charges against them, that I would come pick her up at the motel. She told me she couldn't do that. Emily stared at me for what seemed like the longest time. I believed that she could see the truth in my eyes. That's when I asked her for a favor. Emily, I need the last names and addresses of Dylan, Leo, and Owen. Would you be able to get them for me? She looked at me and then away for a few seconds. What do you want with them? She asked. I need them in my divorce statement. I'm getting the divorce on grounds of adultery. My lawyer told me that I need that information. Can you get it for me? Do you know what you're asking? Sophie is my sister, and you want me to betray her and side with you. No, that's not true. All I'm asking for is the full names and addresses of the men who had sex with my wife. You can betray her. She didn't do anything wrong. Can you? I know you well enough that you know I'm telling the truth. Emily, I can still find out the information if you don't want to help me. It would just be faster since I know you already know their names. I guess more than anything, I want us to stay friends. Okay, I'll get you the information you need, Emily said. But I have to be honest, I'm not sure if I fully believe you. She asked me to stop by the restaurant on Thursday when she was working, and she'd have it ready for me. On Thursday, I went in before her shift and asked to sit in her section. I thought I saw a small smile when she noticed me. When she came to my table, she slipped me a folded piece of paper, which I quickly put in my pocket. I thanked her, ordered breakfast, and went about my day. After work, I handed the note with the information to my lawyer. Later, my lawyer told me that Sophie had reached out. She wasn't willing to sign the divorce papers if they listed adultery as the reason. She wanted a dissolution instead, claiming irreconcilable differences, which, of course, had a lot to do with her wanting to protect her reputation. My lawyer said that dissolution might be the best route since I didn't have solid proof. No witnesses, no photos, nothing to back up my claims except my word, and the 3 men involved certainly weren't going to confess. So, I agreed, and we applied for dissolution, which would take about 4 months to finalize. Then came more bad news. Since I was still on the lease for our apartment, I'd have to continue paying half the rent for 2 more months until I could officially be removed from the agreement. At least after that, I'd be done with the whole mess. But deep down, something still bothered me. I was carrying around this need for revenge, unable to shake the anger and humiliation. I kept thinking about how I just sat there, allowing it all to happen. I should have walked out the moment I saw what was going on instead of staying and hearing her talk about how good it felt. I remember Dylan even asking her if it was as good as it used to be, and the way she said yes, it still stung. In the end, Sophie got to play the victim, and most people seemed to believe her. To everyone else, I just looked like a jealous husband, and no one knew the full story except Emily and my lawyer. I thought the truth would come out in the divorce, but with the dissolution, it was just going to be swept under the rug. I told a few friends and co-workers that she had cheated on me, but I left out the more embarrassing details. Over the next few months, I threw myself into work. I stopped by Emily's restaurant whenever I had the chance. She had given me her schedule, and though it was a bit of a drive, an extra 15 miles, I didn't mind. I enjoyed talking to her. I even asked her out once, but she told me she'd like to, just not until after the divorce was finalized. She was still being cautious, and no one in her family knew we were in contact. One day when I came in, she seemed particularly down. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that Sophie was seeing Dylan again. "It's only been 2 months since you two separated, and she's already back with him," she said. I was shocked. "I thought Dylan was married?" I asked. "He is," Emily confirmed. "I want to see Sophie at your old apartment," and Dylan was there. When she came to the door, she was wearing just a robe, and her hair was a mess. Dylan was in the background, buttoning his shirt. I didn't even go inside after seeing them. I called her a liar and told her she didn't deserve you. All she said was, "Don't tell Mom and Dad." I could see in Emily's eyes that she now fully believed me. "I'm sorry for doubting you," she said softly. Nearly 3.5 months had passed since I had filed for divorce when I got a call from Emily. She said she needed to talk to me urgently, so we met after she finished her classes. I was happy to see her, but I could tell something was wrong. We sat down in a booth at a lounge outside the city and ordered drinks. "What's going on?" I asked. "You seemed really nervous on the phone." Emily took a deep breath before answering. "Sophie's pregnant. I heard her tell Mom last night. She told her you're the father." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's impossible," I said. "We haven't been together in over 5 months. How far along is she?" "She told Mom she's about 3.5 months along," Emily said, sounding hesitant. "That would mean it happened right around the time you left her. Are you sure it's not yours?" I shook my head firmly. "I'm absolutely sure, Emily. We haven't been together in over 5 months. There's no way the baby is mine." But I couldn't help feeling the weight of this new complication. This pregnancy was going to make everything worse, dragging out the dissolution and giving Sophie more leverage than she deserved. "She's really trying to make this difficult," I added with frustration. Emily's expression softened, but I could see she still felt conflicted. "I just can't believe this is happening. I'm sorry, Adam. I know she's my sister, but I can't stand what she's doing. It's just cruel. Honestly, I think you married the wrong sister." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I've been thinking the same thing. If Sophie hadn't gotten pregnant back then, I wouldn't have married her. I've always had feelings for you, Emily, but I thought I was doing the right thing by her, so I put my feelings aside. Emily's eyes widened slightly. "What? You had feelings for me?" I nodded. "Yeah, I had a crush on you for a long time. I didn't want to say anything because, well, it didn't feel right. I thought I was doing the right thing marrying Sophie, but now I see that she never really loved me. I've got to wonder, was that first pregnancy even mine? Knowing what I know now, it feels like I've been lied to this whole time." Emily was silent for a moment, taking in what I'd said. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed everything. Then, quietly, she asked, "Why didn't you ever say anything to me? What would it have changed?" I shrugged. Even if I'd told you how I felt, nothing would have been different. You were her sister, and I was trying to make the marriage work. I didn't want to complicate things. It wouldn't have been fair to you or to her. Besides, I didn't know how you felt, and I didn't want to risk ruining our relationship. Emily looked down at her hands for a moment before speaking again. "I liked you too, Adam. I thought about how lucky Sophie was to have someone like you. But I guess I never thought you'd feel the same way." I sighed, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past few months. "Well, now we know. But it's too late for all that. I tried my best to make the marriage work, but your sister, well, she had other plans." Emily nodded sadly. "I'm sorry, Adam. I really am. I wish things could have been different." There was a long pause, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions that neither of us could quite put into words. Finally, Emily stood up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I have to go now. Please don't tell anyone what I told you about Sophie. I just thought you should know what's going on. I'm sure she's going to bring it up at the dissolution hearing in a couple of weeks." As she hugged me goodbye, I could feel the tension in her body, like she was carrying the weight of both our burdens. When she pulled away, she handed me a folded piece of paper with her work schedule for the next month. Maybe she did want to see me again after all, despite the complicated mess we were both in. I could only imagine how hard it was for her, knowing Sophie was lying to their parents and keeping the fact that she and I were still talking a secret. I stopped by the restaurant for breakfast whenever I knew Emily was working. Even if we only had a few minutes to talk, it was worth the extra 15-mile drive. It gave me something to look forward to in the middle of all the stress and drama. Then, one day, I got a call from my lawyer. He informed me that our court appearance for the dissolution was approaching, and Sophie had made things more complicated by claiming she was pregnant and asking for support. I wasn't surprised. Sophie always knew how to make a bad situation worse. At the dissolution hearing, Sophie arrived with her attorney, looking as if she had everything planned out. But I didn't flinch. I reminded them that we had already agreed to a settlement, and I wasn't paying anything more. I told her attorney flat out that the baby wasn't mine, and I wasn't responsible for any part of it. Her attorney raised an eyebrow, as if questioning how I could be so sure. "We haven't been together for over 5 months, I explained. "There's no way that baby is mine. Sophie knows it, and so do I." Still, I decided to cover all my bases. "I'll sign an addendum to the dissolution," I told them. "If a paternity test proves that I am the father, I'll pay half of the medical bills and provide child support until the child turns 18. But I already know the result. It's not my kid." Sophie's attorney gave me one of those skeptical looks, but I didn't care. I knew the truth, and I was ready to move on. When I left the courtroom, I felt free for the first time in months, but deep down, something still nagged at me. It wasn't enough. Sophie had walked away from this mess with her reputation intact, while I was left to pick up the pieces. I knew I shouldn't be thinking about revenge, but it gnawed at me. Part of me just couldn't let it go. I wanted justice, not just for what Sophie had done to me, but for how she had manipulated everyone around her. The next time I saw Emily, I told her what I had said to Sophie. I confronted her, I admitted. Told her I knew she was sleeping with Dylan and suggested she tell him that he's the father. Emily looked alarmed. "Adam, you didn't tell her I gave you that information, did you?" "No," I reassured her quickly. "I didn't mention you at all. It just slipped out. Nobody knows we're even talking except the guys at work. Now that the divorce is final, maybe we can finally get together." Emily hesitated, and I could tell she was torn. "Adam, I want to, but this isn't the right time. I'm swamped with work, and I'm about to graduate from nursing school. Plus, my family is still in the dark about everything. They blame you for the divorce and the pregnancy, and if I started seeing you now, well, it would just make things more complicated. Maybe once things settle down, we could talk about it." I nodded, understanding her situation, but still feeling a little disappointed. "I'll wait as long as it takes. You know I will." In the meantime, I started gathering information on the men who had been with Sophie. Emily didn't know it, but the details she had given me about them were exactly what I needed. I had their home addresses, and I knew their schedules well enough. I realized that they didn't always hang out together, which made it easier to plan my next steps. Leo seemed like the best place to start. He wouldn't be expecting anything. It was time for me to take control and get the closure I needed. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this like it never happened.